After my son Matt turned 13, I began to suspect my wife of being unfaithful. I grabbed these photos at the pharmacy on my way home from work. Since Julia wasn't home yet, I took a seat and studied the photos. How lovely the day was. When Matt arrived home, we discovered a surprise party with all of his pals waiting for him, which really shocked him. I came upon a pretty great photo of Matt and my friend Steve when going through the pictures. A close-up of their faces was seen. Throughout my entire life, Steve has been my closest friend. His kids call me Uncle John and mine call him Uncle Steve. We have such a close relationship. Upon comparing the images of their faces side by side, I saw something that had escaped my attention before. They shared the same narrow nose, green eyes, and black hair. Their facial features and skin tones were similar. I would have sworn they were father and son if I hadn't realized they weren't. A few more featured images of children attending a celebration, but something in the background drew my eye. There stood Julia and Steve, in what I would describe as an extremely personal stance. It appeared as though they had just finished kissing or were about to do so. I looked closely at the other pictures to see if there were any more that showed them together, but I couldn't find anything. I removed the 2 photos from the bag and placed them in one of my home office's desk drawers. Nothing proved other than the fact that my son resembled Steve and that I owned a photo of Steve and Julia looking close. But I wondered right away if, looking back, I could think of any further proof that Julia had possibly cheated on me. Julia kissed me and went upstairs to change a few minutes after I left, so I didn't have much time to think about it. She did it every day on her way home from work, and up until then I had no cause to suspect anything. I ascended the stairs, suspicions racing through my head, to see if I could catch her in the act. Julia was startled to see me as I walked into the bedroom, but she didn't act uncomfortable. After putting on our house clothes, Julia said, "Hey honey, how was your day?" "Not too bad. I picked up the pictures from Matt's party on the way. They turned out great. But didn't we take too many of them? 5 reels of film for a birthday party?" I inquired. "After all the trouble we went through to make him think he wasn't having a party, only to throw him a surprise party like this one. I wanted to make damn sure he had enough pictures to remember it by." Julia said it was great to invite all his friends, family, and even Steve, Mary, and their kids to the party, I said. There was movement, but was it in response to the name being said, or was it just natural? Did she flinch when I mentioned Steve's name? Yes, Julia agreed. It was a great party. I got nothing else from her, save maybe a slight flinch. I made the decision to monitor her and Steve as much as I could to find out if they were planning anything. Not immediately, anyhow. I didn't utilize all the fancy tracking gadgets, audio recorders, video cameras, and phone tapping devices. However, I just started keeping track, so whenever Julia told me where she was going, I would look for an excuse to give her a call to find out whether she was there. A few weeks later, the body of a young child who had gone missing was discovered in the lake. As fortune would have it, her family had already undergone DNA testing so that she would be recognized in the event of an emergency. Julia provided me with the ideal chance to figure out what was bothering me. "John, I think we should do these DNA cards for the children too. If something ever happens and a body or body part is found, I'd want to know if it's our child or not, wouldn't I?" Julia responded. "You're absolutely right. This girl was missing teeth and the body was pretty badly damaged, so normal methods didn't work. I think having the children's DNA on file is a wise decision," I replied. I promised to take tests and register all 4 of our kids, Matt, Ashley, Hannah, and Sarah, with the county. I made the decision to request it once I was at the family doctor's office. Dr. Smith said, "So, John, what happened?" "I would like copies of the tests. It's not that I don't trust the county in terms of keeping the information in case something happens and they need it. It's just that I feel better having copies of them in my home safe," I replied. Dr. Smith answered, "Sure, John, no problem. Many parents make the same request. I had a week-long business trip out of town after 2 weeks. I went into a doctor's office there and got tested for DNA to see how I looked. The doctor, a woman I lived with for 8 years, claims I am the father of her 4 children and is now demanding child support from me. I have reason to believe that I am not the father of 1 or more of them. I have demanded DNA records of the children from her, and now I'm asking you to tell me how many of them I should be financially responsible for," I replied. Of course, it's sad when someone says a child is yours when it's not. I've seen several marriages destroyed as a result of this. Are you saying you are not married to this woman? Inquired the physician. No, ma'am, we broke up 3 years ago. I'm married to someone else, and all this alimony actually pisses me off. I had the envelope with the results on it before I came home. I hadn't looked at them yet, and the closer I got to getting the results, the less sure I was that I wanted to know everything. When I got home Friday night, there was a note on the table from Julia saying that she and the kids had gone to her mom's for the weekend. Unable to endure an entire weekend to figure out what to do, I had fallen out at 4 a.m. after having a big drink. When I woke up, I began to consider what I ought to do. I wanted proof that Steve was my children's father, even if I suspected him to be such. I made the decision to start using high tech at this moment. My house is not too far from a store that sells surveillance gear. So I went there and bought the entire set on Saturday morning. I set up sound recorders and tiny motion-activated cameras in every room in the house. In order to always know where Steve's SUV and Julia's automobile were, I also installed tracking devices in both of them. I configured everything such that the data was stored on a basement computer that I could access from anywhere in the world using my laptop. I had set up the monitoring I had called to let them know Julia would be out of town for the entire weekend. So on Saturday afternoon when Steve dropped by, I went with him and we set up the device on his SUV. I knew for a fact that he wouldn't be spending this weekend with her. Looking through Julia's belongings for anything that might lead to her disappearance took up most of Sunday morning. I didn't know that she kept a journal or notes, and her computer appeared to be in good condition. Another piece of circumstantial evidence was the sexy lingerie I had never seen before, hidden away in the back of her wardrobe. I gave them all a great hug when Julia and the kids arrived home on Sunday night. Julia really amazed me in bed that night. "John, you don't worry too much, but I think I'm pregnant," she replied. I questioned her. "Pregnant?" "Yeah, I think so. I plan to go to the doctor tomorrow to see what he says, but I have a feeling," Julia replied. I made the decision at this moment to visit the doctor and obtain a fertility test as well. Before Julia became pregnant with Matt, we had been trying to conceive for a very long time. In order to provide her the best care possible, I took time off from work. That was how it was with every child. I am aware that getting pregnant is difficult. After going through all that with the previous 4 kids, she became pregnant on her own volition. I found that to be suspicious. On Monday, I went to a clinic where no one knew me and traveled to a nearby town. I waited after taking the test. My sperm count was higher than usual. This was merely an additional piece of information. Even though my wife and I had made numerous attempts to conceive and I had a good sperm count, Steve was the one who managed to conceive her. I quickly returned to my work and retrieved the data that had been accumulated up until that moment. Steve drove to a hotel on the east side of town after leaving for work, according to the tracking devices. Julia's automobile traveled to the same hotel after stopping briefly at the doctor's office. I returned to my work because I had had enough. That evening, Julia was ecstatic to learn that she was expecting and that we would soon have a second child. I was doing everything I could to keep from revealing all the details and implicating her. I learned more throughout the course of the following few weeks and concluded that they had established a rather decent routine. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they got together for a long lunch at the hotel. They consistently reserved the same room. They didn't need to see what was inside, so I snapped shots of them entering and exiting. This was because they would get together at our place every Tuesday and Thursday to have sex in our guest bedroom. It was getting harder for me not to slam the door as I saw more. I finally recorded a phone conversation that drove me insane after 2 months of watching them. Steve said, "Hey, are you comfortable talking?" "Yeah, John's playing golf and the kids are at their friends' houses," responded Julia. "I've been worried about John lately. Hun's been acting strange. Do you think he couldn't have found out everything?" "He hasn't figured out anything in years. Why would he figure it out now?" Julia responded. "As for Matt, he's becoming more and more like me every day," Steve said. "So what, Johan thinks I'm the perfect wife? He'll never suspect I'm cheating on him, and he'll never believe that all 15 years I've been taking steps to make sure I only have children with you and not him," stated Julia. Steve remarked, "I'm still not sure I approve of that." Julia said, "Take it back now, or you'll never touch me again." Steve said, "All right, I take it back. I really can't wait until Monday." "Oh, baby, I can't Monday. I have a lunch meeting. It's a really big deal. So Tuesday we're just going to need a really long lunch, okay?" clarified Julia. Steve said, "What time should I be there?" "Around 11. I'll see you then," Julia said, bringing the discussion to an end. On Sunday, I listened to this conversation. I saw an attorney on Monday and brought enough documentation to begin the divorce process on the grounds of adultery. "So, John, what grounds for divorce do you choose?" said Dave. "Marital infidelity, are you sure? That's actually hard to prove in our state," Dave replied. "Well, maybe you can tell me if there's enough to prove it. Pictures of my wife and her lover in the process of sexual intercourse. I also have video. In fact, even some phone conversations recounting their affair, including one where my wife admits that she deliberately took steps to have children with her lover instead of me. And last but not least, DNA tests that show that none of the 4 children I am raising are mine." "Is that enough?" I inquired. "Yes, that should be more than enough. I'll send your wife the divorce papers right away," Dave responded. "Can I pick the time and place where she gets the papers?" "What do you mean?" Dave said. "Tomorrow at 11 she is supposed to meet her lover at our house. Can we make it so that she gets them at home? Say at 11:30 or 11:45? Handing over the papers at the time she commits adultery would be murderous evidence," I said. "Yes, that's an acceptable idea. Would it be illegal to invite my wife's parents and sisters, a few of her friends, her lover's wife, and perhaps their bosses?" I inquired. "I can see you're hungry for a little revenge. Well, if you tell them it's a surprise party in honor of the new baby, and they don't know in advance what they're going to see, it should be fine," Dave said. "Very good," I said in closing. I made a few calls after leaving the attorney's office, inviting everyone to the surprise party in Julia's honor, with the exception of Mary. Naturally, Mary would inform Steve, and subsequently he would become aware of the situation and refuse to leave. I contacted Mary around 10:45 on Tuesday morning, asking her to come over to our house so we could have a quick conversation. I made everyone wait in silence in the garden until everyone had arrived for the celebration. "For the party," I replied. "Julia is resting inside, so we would sneak up and surprise her." Dave had the divorce papers with him as well. Unnoticed, we crept into the house and made our way to the guest bedroom. I threw the door open and everyone said, "Surprise!" The corridor and the room were filled with shocked expressions. Mary yelled at Steve right away. Julia was yelled at by her relatives. Julia began to scream at me. Steve attempted to grab his clothing and flee the house, but his supervisor prevented him from leaving and informed him later. Dave quietly approached Julia, who was sobbing violently while sitting on the bed behind a sheet in the middle of all of this pandemonium. "Julia Davis, you are hereby served with these divorce papers filed by your husband, John Davis. He is seeking a divorce on the grounds of adultery. Mr. Davis is not seeking any form of custody of the 4 children already born or the child in your womb, as DNA testing has shown that Mr. Davis is not the biological father of any of the children, and a recorded phone conversation between you and Steve Wilson states that you intentionally prevented the children from being with Mr. Davis so that you could become pregnant by your lover. Mr. Davis is claiming 90% of the entire estate. A court date will be set for this case unless you accept the terms of these documents." "Good day," Dave said. Dave delivered his speech in a loud, impassive voice, almost like a robot. He handed the papers to Julia and left. Both Julia and Steve lost their jobs. Steve divorced Mary. Julia's family, who always liked me, disowned her. I didn't get 90% in the divorce. I had to settle for 75.5%. But in a separate lawsuit, I got compensation from Steve for preventing me from having children. I love Julia with all my heart, and if I had acted quickly and made a claim against her from the first moment of suspicion, it surely would have broken my heart. Now, however, knowing the depth of her infidelity and treachery, it was easier for me to cut her out of my life. I still see her around town from time to time, and each time she tries to apologize to me, but I don't want to hear it. She cheated on me for years. She deliberately kept me from making her a child so she could have Steve's baby, and then made me believe I was the father. If it wasn't for the fact that I loved her so deeply, I'd want to see her dead. But no matter how much she abused me, I'll always have memories of the good times. The kids were confused to learn that Uncle Steve was actually their father and the cousins were their half-siblings. They all spent a lot of time in counseling because of this, and I'm sorry this happened to them. But it was another measure of Julia's revenge. She wanted Steve's kids instead of me, so now she has to live with them hating her for what she did. They still call me Daddy when they see me.